domicile design. Domicile design, we like to share what's in the workroom. And today, this is the third part of of 3 videos in the series, and was culminating with the fabrication of a French mattress or a button mattress. We started the series with a piano bench that we modified, we cut down, we painted with chalk paint, we did some embellishment on it with stencils and decoupage, and got that ready. We have our inspiration fabric that we used for the fabric techniques that we used, so it all coordinates. And this is the fabric that we used here. The second episode was custom buttons, showing you how to make custom buttons that we're going to use on this cushion here at the end. 2 different ways to make custom buttons, so check that out. And today we're putting our cushion together. So it's called a French mattress or a button mattress. Traditionally, a French mattress would have been built up with layers and layers of cotton batting. Taken apart, separated, put back together, and then it would have had fabric covering around it, and it would have been button tufted, and the edges, you'll see, get pinched. They get pinched up a little bit. Traditionally, it was called a French mattress because a lot of times it was used with a pillow ticking, or it was used on a daybed, and probably often found in France. But it's also a type of cushion that would have been handmade, and it was used also in the Middle East. It shows up a lot in the Middle East. So, but the name attributed to it is generally a French mattress or a button mattress. So the fabrics that the fabric that we're using, this is a Schumacher linen. It's one that I had just a little bit of it left in my workroom, and I was waiting for a special piece to use it on. And when this piece came up, this project came up, I thought that this would be the perfect application for this linen fabric. And as it turns out, when I was cutting it, this is all I have left are scraps. So it, is probably a very good use of this fabric, because like this is it. One wrong cut, and I was searching for coordinating fabric to go with it. So I've got my pieces all cut out, and I'm going to tell you the dimensions that I cut out to. I'm going to start with telling you about my base. So, traditionally this would be layers and layers of cotton batting built up so that it's as thick as you want it to be. Oftentimes, if you think about a futon mattress, they would have been layered up quite thick, like a futon mattress. And the thing with cotton fibers in particular is that they compress a lot over time. They compress really a lot, and they get really hard. So this is a modern take on a traditional looking French mattress. This is not, I'm not showing you how traditionally these mattresses would have been made. In my opinion, you can make them in the traditional way, but they're not going to hold up over time. They're just not going to have the loft. They're going to be really heavy, really dense. I mean, if you think about a futon mattress, if you've ever had one, they start out really nice, and it doesn't take too long with moisture and pressure for them to go really rock hard. So what we're using for our cushion in here, this is a 2-inch slab of foam. I have commercial grade foam. If you go to your local fabric store, you'll get craft quality foam, which is okay, but it's going to be a foam that breaks down a little faster. It's generally much cheaper than a commercial grade foam. This commercial grade foam will last many, 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 many years longer than a craft foam. Craft foam is just made and manufactured to be cheap, economical, generally used for craft projects, not always good for heirloom pieces or for pieces that you really want around for a long time. So if you really want to invest in a better quality foam, go to a drapery workroom, go to your local upholsterer, and see if you can buy some foam from them, because what they have available is far superior to what you're going to find in the local fabric store. But this is a 2-inch piece of foam here, and I've got it covered because foam, you know, is kind of, it's kind of sticky, but it's also kind of slick. And the overall look of this cushion when we're done, we want it to be nice. We want it to look like that layered cotton mattress. So we want it to look like it's got layers and layers of loft inside. We don't want it to look like a slab of foam is inside. So I've taken my foam and I've wrapped it. This is like a very thin layer of like a quilt, a very thin quilt batting. And it's a spun batting, almost like a flannel feel, and it's quite thin. And I've simply just wrapped it like a cushion. So here's my fold edge, and I have hand stitched, I've whip stitched around 3 sides here, just to give me a slicker surface, so that when my other layers are on this, it'll give it something to stick to. And you'll see, because the next the layers that I show you going on this, there's going to be flannel up against this. And so I think, you know, it's almost that Velcro effect. The flannel on this, which almost feels like a flannel, it's going to let it stick to it and almost bond without having to use any kind of glue or anything. Because I generally don't like using glue if I don't have to, because over time things oxidize, they change. Glue, you know, tends to stain over time. So this, I'm going to give you some dimensions of all of the pieces that I'm cutting. I'll give you the dimension of this, and I'm going to give you the dimensions of all the strips that I cut and the face fabric that I cut. I'm going to tell them to you here, but I'm also going to leave them as in the description box. So below this video, if you click on the full description, I'll give you the formula so that you just plug in your own dimensions and then add to it the allowances that I tell you about. Okay, so our finished size, this is the example that I'm showing you, it's 28 by 14. So that is the size, and I cut my foam the same size as the top of my bench. It sort of has a beveled edge, and I went in just ahead of that. So when my cushion sits on it, it's going to look like it fits end to end. It might even overhang just a little bit, which I think is fine. The look that we're going for with this French mattress is one that is kind of more of that shabby chic casual look. So if it overhangs the base, that's fine. I don't want it to be shorter. So therefore I made my foam the exact same dimension as the base of my bench. So that was 28 by 14. So then you cut your top and your bottom fabrics. And I have a stripe. So the thing I'll tell you about stripes is plan it out. Plan what you want in the center. Plan what you want on the sides. Plan and know that you're going to be matching your stripe as it goes around the boxing. So before you do a bunch of cuts, you need to really think about, like, cut the top and cut the bottom first so that you know what's in the center before you cut your boxing strips. Because if you cut your boxing strips first, you may not be thinking about how is this fabric going to be centered top and bottom on my cushion. So these are my top and bottom pieces cut, and what you're going to add, the allowance you're going to add is 1.5 inches to both the width and the depth of this cushion. You're going to add 1.5 inches, so that gives me 29.5 by 15.5. because I'm adding from the 28 by 14. So these are my tops and my bottoms. I have two pieces here, identical. And that's the other thing, they're identical so that when they come around, not that you're going to see the bottom, you won't see the bottom at the same time you see the top, but if we ever wanted to flip this cushion around, it's going to be totally symmetrical and pattern matched from front to side to back, up around the other side. So that is key. So top and bottom pieces are 1.5 inches added to both the width and the depth. So I've cut those. Then the next pieces I needed to cut are my boxing depths, or my boxing strips. Like we call these boxing strips. So you're going to take the depth of your cushion, for me it's 2 inches, and you're going to add 6.5 inches to the height of your boxing strip. And the length is going to be the same. This is, I'll call this your adjusted length and width here is what you've cut this. So you add 6.5 to my 2 inches of foam, and that gives me 8.5 inches in height. And then it's going to be the same, either 29.5 or 15.5. So these are my boxing strips. This is for the front and the back, and you'll see that I've pattern matched it so it lines up. And that one too. It's all going to line up when I take this down to the sides. On the short ends, the fabric's not going to line up. I could have just made it a blue solid because I end with a blue stripe here. I could have just made it a blue solid. But traditionally, because this is sort of a stripe pattern, traditionally your fabric, if your stripes are running vertically here, they're going to also run vertically going along the short edge. So my boxing strip is going to look like this on my sides. Okay? So it has to turn, but what you'll see, I'll show you on this piece, what you'll see is that I also was very aware of where the center of this fabric was and where the stripes were going to be. So on this one, I chose to have the blue in the center and the off-white stripes on the end. I could have done it so that the off-white was in the center here, but I'll tell you that, you know, you saw how much fabric I had left. I didn't really have this option to go with off-white in the center. I really only had the option of doing it this way with the blue in the center, so that's what we're going with. But just know that if you're making a custom cushion, be aware that you have to center the sides as well. So this is the same thing for this. These side boxing strips, they're going to be 8.5 inches deep here by, this would be the 15.5, which was our adjusted depth. Okay? So the next thing we're going to do is you're going to need some either muslin lining, or what I've chosen to use is flannel. In drapery making, we have something called flannel interlining. And it's kind of a heavier weight than a dressmaker flannel. Really nice, really soft. And I thought, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be quilting the boxing strips, only the boxing strips. So you're going to cut some flannel strips that are your adjusted lengths for both for your depth and for the width of your cushion. 1 inch shallower. So instead of the 8.5, it's going to be 7.5. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it's going to be 7.5. So it's just 1 inch. It's the depth plus 5.5 instead of the depth plus 6.5. So, and that's just for the muslin or the lining or flannel. If you don't have flannel inner lining, you know, that's used in home dec, then you can also go to your fabric store, look for pajama flannel. You're going to want to look for like white, or this is an off-white. I love using cream. Sometimes white can change the tone of fabrics, and I didn't want white showing through, although I've got batting, so it probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. Color's not going to come through this layer. But go for a light neutral if you're looking at using dressmaker flannel. And what I would say with dressmaker flannel, it's quite thin, so you might want to get your flannel and throw it in the washer and the dryer, and it'll come up to a much more rich flannel fabric. Great for it when any kind of light fabric needs extra body. If you're working with silks or you're working with linens, throw in a layer of flannel before you put your lining in. So cut the muslin. Again, I'm going to have all of these, the adjusted calculations. I'm going to have all the formulas in the description notes, so you can check there as well. So I've cut all of my boxing strips, and then I've cut my batting the same size as my flannel sections. And this is like a 1-inch batting. It's what I have when I wrap my cushions. I use 1-inch batting. So that's what I'm using to sandwich. And what we're going to do is, we've got a layer of batting, of flannel here, then a layer of batting, and then this is the face fabric. And on this stripe, we're going to take it to the machine, and we're going to stitch in between every color change. So I'm only going to pin these sections in the center. I'm going to start working from the centers and go out as I run my stitch lines. The stitch lines are going to run down right where you see color changes. Even on this shallow stripe, I'm going to run a stitch there. I'm going to run another stitch on the opposite side, and I'm going to run another stitch there. And you'll see that when we do this, that's going to sort of give us a look of loft to this mattress. It's going to make it look sort of more like a mattress, give it more of that style. And the extra, you know, this is our boxing, so all of this extra width in here, or length in here, whatever the height, I guess, all this extra height is going to get consumed into our cushion as we fabricate it. So don't worry about that. So I'm just going to finish pinning my boxing. We only do this stitching to our boxing strips. Don't worry about these, the tops and bottoms. These do not get stitched like that. You will see if you watched the other video where we did our buttons, our custom buttons, the top is going to get button tufted. So the stitching lines up here is kind of pointless. It's not going to show up, and it probably would affect the effect that we're going to get once we start button tufting this. So I'm going to keep pinning up some of these sections. I'm only going to pin in the centers. I'm going to take these 4 sections to my machine, and I'm going to stitch the sort of quilt effect lines. Then I'm also going to stitch all 4 sections together on the short seams. So here on the short seams, so that I have the boxing in one continuous piece all the way around. And then we'll go on to the next step. So I'm going to pin you right now, and then I'll move you over to the machine where we'll start the sewing, and we'll move on to the next step as well. back at the machine, and I'm going to show you how I stitch in these quilting lines. I want to flatten things out, and I'm just stitching right in between this color change. I have extremely high loft on these in this. If you have a thinner loft, it won't be so extreme, but I just want to flatten this out so that I don't get too much loft in between. Hopefully you can see this. I know the fluorescent lights do not make it easy to see light colored fabrics. But there's one stitch right there. And you'll see how the profile really comes out. So I'm using like 1-inch batting. You could go thinner for sure. 1 inch is probably extreme. And what you need to remember when you're quilting, especially with a high loft batting like this, is that the fabric overall, as I quilt, this fabric strip is getting narrower. It still has a lot of stretch in it, so I think we're going to be okay when we go to attach it to our sides. And we don't have quilting up at that top edge because our batting and our flannel is just a 1/2 inch on either side short of the full. So here, see, I don't have batting. I don't have batting going all the way to the edge, so this is where I'll be able to stitch my top and bottom. I had a job once where I had a client. So I'm going to tell you, just as a reminder, see, this is starting to creep a little. So when you start, just make sure you're checking that this is not creeping up too high. You want to keep it at about a 1/2 inch. I started talking and I should have been checking on that. But I had a client who wanted some slip covers made out of quilted fabric, and she asked how much yardage she needed. And I had told her, you know, if it was 9 yards for a chair, I think she had an extra back cushion on them, so I may have said that I needed 10.5 or 11 yards for a slip cover. So she had 2 chairs, and I think so she ended up getting, say, 22, 23, 24 yards of fabric quilted. And it was quilted with an extreme, this kind of like 1-inch loft. It was a very high loft it was quilted with. And I started draping the slip cover and quickly realized that I was going to run out of fabric. It was also a floral fabric where I had to pattern match, so I lost fabric with the pattern matching. And we ended up, on that job, we ended up having to order, 2 more times we had to order quilted fabric because there was no way for me to really estimate. In hindsight, what I should have said is I needed 25 yards of quilted fabric when it's done, you know, so it might have taken 35 yards of fabric to end up with 25 yards of quilted fabric. I mean, there was so much loft in this fabric, and the way it was quilted to the design all over, so it shrank both in the width and in the length. Really quite interesting. It was one of those jobs where I said never again will I work with quilted fabric in a slipcover, because I just kept running out of fabric with it because it kept shrinking up so much, and I just couldn't estimate you know, how much I would need. They wanted to know how much to quilt, and I couldn't tell them how much fabric to quilt to give me what I needed to finish the job. Anyway, So just make sure as you're going, make sure your layers are lined up fairly equal. You know, leaving that gap at the front and the back. Because that's going to be important for attaching the top and the bottom, which we're going to be doing in the next step. So as you can see, I love the way that quilting stitch just really gave these stripes some dimension. Hopefully you can see that dimension like that, but there's the loft and there's the striping. So the next step is, as I said, we're putting all of our boxing strips together. I'm using 1/2 inch seam allowance here because I've got really thick batting that I'm working with, and I've lost a lot of fabric because it's so lofty here, such a high loft. So I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm stitching these boxing strips together. So this is the short going to one of the longer sides. And just make sure you're not catching any of the batting when you're sewing it. It might be hard for you to see, but I'm only stitching the fabric layers here. And I'm keeping the batting out of the way. My machine does not have a back stitch, so I tend to just run forward. So these are all my strips. I just have to do this last one. I've stitched the stripes on all of these already. I was just showing you the last strip that I was at. So I've got short, long, and this is my last seam, my last corner seam, and then we'll attach the top and the bottom, and we're going to be doing some pinning. I'm going to keep this extra batting in here for right now because I think I'm going to want it in my corners, so I'm not cutting any of this away. I might have extra in here, but I'm just going to leave it all until I really figure out if I have any extra, or if I need more, then I can stuff some more in. So this is kind of hard to see, but I'm going to show you best I can. This is basically, these are all my sides, right? There's a short end and a long end and a short end and a long end. So now I'm going to take one of my tops here, my top pieces, I'll just find out where my sides are. This is an edge. It's hard to see our corners now. Okay, so this is our top, and I'm going to start pinning this, matching up where my pattern is, because we're going to stitch, if this is my top, we're going to stitch all the way along. So I'm going to do some placement. Oh, it looks like it's going to work really well. I was really kind of worried that it was all going to shrink up so much that I'd be in trouble and not have enough fabric. But because you stop the batting that 1 inch or 1/2 inch shy, then the fabric, of course, it just lines up beautifully. Kind of wondering if I should put this fabric on the bottom to stitch. The good thing about a stripe is that you've got very clear reference points for seaming. You can really see those. So that's a good thing. So you're going to see that there's going to be the 1/2 inch seam allowance on the side here. So I'm really just going to be pinning where I see the stripes changing. And let me just pin along the side here. This is where I might lose it a little bit if I don't pin it. When you're sewing lengths like this, it's easy for a fabric to sort of grow or shrink. And that's when pinning is important. And I know on these sides, I'm probably going to have to stretch this boxing a little bit where it was quilted down. I'm going to have to stretch it a little. And I don't have a stripe as a guide, although it's not bad there. It's not bad. That actually works pretty well. So I've gotten a little bit close to the edge on some of these, but I'm going to be careful when I'm stitching. I might even back some of these stitches out. I don't want to stitch in this boxing, I don't think. I may just go over that. But I really don't want to go too much into that boxing. So hopefully you can see this. I'm just using the stripe as a marker. I'm just going to repin from this side because I'm going to pin it at the base on the bottom, and that's not lined up at all. And as I stitch, I'm also going to be making any little adjustments in pattern placement so that I'm as accurate as possible. The fabric, the bottom fabric is always going to want to pull a little bit faster than your top fabric. That's just the way it works with a normal machine where you've got feed dogs that are sort of pulling from the bottom. So as you're sewing, you always want to be checking. I always generally have sort of slight tension on the top fabric. So that I can sort of manipulate it and make sure things are in alignment as they should be. So here's our 4th side. So this is where I sort of was creeping up a little bit higher here. And I may have no choice but to just stitch over that. I could probably snip those threads away and loosen them from the edge because it's going to be in the seam allowance. It's not really going to show too much if I do that. But we'll see what happens. I'm going to say that it might be okay. I think this is one of those projects too that in the end there's so much little detail with it that I think a few of these imperfections is going to sort of add to the charm, and it's also I don't think going to be so noticeable. Like you might notice it, but anyone else looking is probably not ever going to notice. It's kind of that shabby chic look. It will definitely look homemade, but it shouldn't look sloppy. Okay, so this is tricky. I'm going to put this under. And I'm still going to go with, I'm going to try and go with that 1/2 inch seam allowance still. This is where I'm riding up a little high. So we're stitching the sides to the top or bottom. This is probably going to be the top because I'm going to be stitching all 4 sides of this one. And on the bottom, when I get to the bottom piece, I'm going to have to leave one side open. So I'm probably going to leave the short side open. Right up to my corner. So I'm going to have to pivot and turn my fabric. So this is kind of tricky. I'm going to try to open this corner up a little. It's a good thing this fabric is really nice and thin. And I think in the end, you know, we'll end up sort of putting in foam and batting to sort of fill in some of the places where it might not seem so full. So here's where it's really tight here. But I am just, you probably can't see, but I'm just gonna ride over this. It's so tight to that top. I don't have a choice. Can't really peel that back. But I think, look at how much extra I have over here. So on my bottom, it won't be an issue. I can already see that. Because I was so tied up at one end, then I'm gonna have surplus on the bottom. So I just want to make sure, I don't mind if this flannel is in here, but I just want to make sure my stripes are lined up best possible. I'll just have that's just a yarn, a thread cut. And this is going to want to creep and fold different places. I think that's okay. We'll just bunch it in. So I can see that my stripe pattern is actually staying remarkably consistent all the way around, which is really good. Because as you can see, this is a bit cumbersome to work with. It's a little awkward. We got batting and flannel and all kinds of weird layers going on here. And then of course it wants to fall off the table. Alright, that was the second side. The corners are tricky, so just take your time going around the corners. That's all you can do. I'm going to kind of open up that seam when I go into the corner. Probably can't see anything. My fingers are probably in the way. But I just opened the seam up in the corner and was able to go over it. That's a little bit easier, let's say. Just open up that corner, go over and then you can make the curve to turn. And we're just going to catch all of that. And here, this is one of our short sides, so it's just the solid blue, so I don't have any stripes as a reference. I just need to make sure that when I get to this corner that my fabrics are lining up on me. And then I'll know that I'm in the ballpark. And I'm just going to have to go over this. I really wasn't watching how close I got there, so that's all just going to get caught up in that edge, which I think it's going to be okay. So if you were doing this with thinner batting, you won't have all of this extra bulk in here like I have. Might be a little easier to work with. I don't know. It's always, whenever you're working with batting and you're sewing something that's quilted or like this, it's always going to be awkward. So here, this should be sort of, oops, sorry, bumped you. Should be my last side, but I started on the, I started part way in the short side, so I'm gonna have to do one more corner. So here again is where I've got stripes, and now I've got some pins in here that I'm gonna need to make sure I get these pins out as I go, so I don't bust a needle. So ever so slightly, I am just double checking that I've got all of my stripes lining up here. I'm running out of fabric there. I think it'll be okay. If I had been more diligent about making sure that these fabrics were a good ½ inch, but you know, I'm honest. Oh, see, there's a pin. That was blocking. If I don't know if I would be able to figure out sort of the allow for all the take up. Well, I'm just happy that all the stripes and everything are lining up as they should. So you could certainly do this mattress in a different fabric. I think when you go with a stripe, it is more traditional to the style and to the look. It's kind of what people expect to see when you say French mattress. You kind of have that image of like a pillow ticking stripe, because that's what the mattresses would have been made out of. So it sort of, it's a nod to the traditional fabrics choice. But because these are so popular now, I've seen them in all different fabrics. So it would be fun to try it in a different fabric for sure. Then if you do this and you do it in a different fabric, I would love to see a photo. So please share your photo of your finished mattress in our comment section. I'm sure other people would love to see it as well, be inspired by your choice of fabric. So I'm getting to where I started, but I have to go just a little bit. Yep. further. And then we'll take a peek from the inside and see how we did. So here's it on the inside. And I think it is going to look pretty good. So now we're going to put the bottom on, and instead of sewing, see, we've done all 4 sides. You can kind of see. I've done all 4 sides. When I put the bottom on, I'm going to leave the short side open, I think. I mean, ideally, to get the foam in, it'd be easier to leave one of the long edges open. But I think I'm going to leave a short side open, and I'm going to try and shimmy the inner piece. I think it'll work. I'm going to try and shimmy it in from the side. So we'll leave an end, and I'll pin again. Okay, here it is. Let's see how this goes. It doesn't quite look like the French mattress that we're after just yet, but we still have a couple more steps to go. So I think we'll get there in the end. And what I decided to do, I didn't leave a short end open trying to shimmy this foam in. I actually did leave an opening here on my long side. It's not the full length, hoping that I can put my foam, coil my foam up and get it in through here. And I'm going to try and put it in now at this point before we do anything, just so that I know I've got it in there and it fits. So thing with foam is you can smush it down as much as you can. And I just have to kind of shimmy it on. Okay, well, I was able to get it in. That's a good thing. And I've got some loose places where, you know, my batting was loose in the corners, so I'm just going to make sure everything is kind of flat going into those corners. And I'm just positioning my cushion kind of halfway in this boxing strip. And you'll see in a moment why we do that. I've got some T-pins here. I use T-pins quite a bit in the work that I do. So these T-pins, they're really nice and long, very nice and long. So, and I think they're going to be helpful in this kind of project. If you just have regular pins, then that's okay too. I think what I'm going to do is this end, I'm not sure if I'm going to add in a little bit more batting in here just yet. I'm not sure. I think it's going to be fine with what I've got, but my intention was to actually put in another 1-inch piece of batting top and bottom. So I might go ahead and cut that. I'm going to do some pinning first, and then I'm going to assess whether or not I want to open it back up and drop in another layer of batting on top of what I have with my foam. So I'm not going to add anything for the sides. The sides are good. It's just a question of the top. So I'm just going to pin down with my little straight pins. I'm going to pin this seam where I'm going to have to come back in and hand stitch this together. We're getting to the point where we are going to be doing a lot of hand stitching to get this looking the way it needs to look to be considered a French mattress. So I'm just lining up the pattern. It's one of the reasons why I kept this long end open. It's usually easier to get your foam in if you're on a long side, because I could have made that opening a little bit wider if I needed to, and not have to shimmy. Although, you know, the way this foam was, it could have worked either way. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to start pinning from this side. So, you know, this is so tall, but now we need to get back to where it's just, I got a pin in here I didn't take out. We need to get back to where it's 2 inches deep, because that's the size of our foam. So more or less, you know, I'm going to make sure I don't have any more pins in here. when you're working with batting like that, it's easy to lose pins. And I felt as I was going around that I was probably not catching them all. And in the end, we're going to end up steaming this too. Okay, so the next step is to turn this down like 1.5 inches. I'll show you from here. We're going to be turning this down on itself about 1.5 inches all the way around like that. So I'm going to start pinning. Maybe I'll pin from your side over there. I'll pin from here, and then you can kind of maybe see as I'm working. I don't like these threads, so I'm going to cut these threads. And I think I'm just going to like eyeball this. Let me get a little ruler. But this is something I generally just eyeball what I'm doing. So that's about 1 1/4, 1.5, right there. And my T-pins are here. So I'm just going to do this in a few places so I get a feel for how this is going to be taking shape. And if it's all just pinned, then I can make some adjustments if I need to as well. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up doing some hand stitching. And we're going to be stitching on the inside seam to the outside. We're going to be doing tacks that go through here. It'll be a running stitch, but it's called stab stitching, and we're going to go in and out, and we're going to be taking little bites and pinching it and stitching it as we go, and we're going to do it all the way around. And so you can kind of see as if this pinches down, and this is just one side, we're going to flip it and do the other as well. So all that batting and everything gets caught, you know, in this roll. The sides will look contoured and fluffy. That's the idea. So I really don't know if I'm taking too much of a bite, so I'm going to have to just pin all this and then flip it over to the other side, do the same thing, and hope that I'm just kind of like, just want this to roll. Hope that I'm kind of taking the same bite all the way around, the same little pinch. You know, and if I'm not, I'm just going to go around and adjust the pins as I need to. And once this is all pinned, then the stitching is going to go quite quickly, I think. I have a curved needle. I'll probably use my curved needle for the stitching. If you don't have a curved needle, you're going to want a nice long needle for sure. See, I'm thinking right now I might put batting in here, a layer of batting. It is going to get tufted. Maybe it won't matter. I usually like a little more loft. And I have so much loft on the sides that I'm just thinking that I might want that extra loft where the buttons are. So maybe you can start to see it. It's sort of taking shape a little bit on this front side. This is the top of our cushion. Okay, now I'm going to flip it over quickly. This is my pin area where I can slide in more batting if I need to. I'm going to take a tuck here. So I'm going to want to get down to where I've got 2 inches. So I think I'm on target with the size of this all going down, but I think I definitely want to stick in a little extra batting. So I'm not going to do too much pinning here, because when I get around to that other side, I'm going to take that out. I'm going to cut 2 pieces of batting. I don't need any batting for the sides. So I'm going to cut 2 pieces of batting that are the exact same size as my foam insert. And I'm going to slide a piece on top and a piece on bottom, and it's just going to sit in between. I think that's what I'm going to do. Although as I bring this in together, once I button top this, no, I think I'm still, because linen has got so much, this is going to soften up and it's going to relax. And I think if I don't have this padded out with batting, I'm not always happy about how wrinkly linen looks when it's got some flex in it. It does that. So I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to just pin this side, and then I'm going to stop and put that batting in, because I think that's going to make a difference in what I'm doing. And it's certainly going to be the time to do it. I don't want to get too far in this process and have to open it up to put that batting in. So this is the time to decide if you're gonna need more batting. But I think you can kind of see here now how it's getting pinched and how it'll be pinched. And I think if I add a little bit more batting, top and bottom, this is still going to get button tufted, which means this is going to sort of pull in and dimple in strategic places. We're going to map that out with probably, I think we're going to use 8 buttons, so we'll see. That's the plan, 8 buttons. But I'm going to pull these out, these pins, because I think I can get the batting in without disturbing all this. Yep, I'll be able to slide that in. Alright, so I'm going to cut 2 rectangles of 1-inch batting that I can lay in there, and then we'll keep going with the pinning. Okay, so put that extra foam in. I can already tell that this is more of the loft that I'm looking for. So when this gets button tufted, this is going to give me more of that plush look that I want. So adding foam on top of a slab, adding batting on top of a slab of foam is always going to give you more of this plush look. And it sort of disguises the foam slab underneath. So I think in the end, when we get done stitching all of this and doing our button tufting, we're going to end up with the look of a French mattress, but it's going to be a cushion that's really going to hold up over time. This is not going to lose any of its any of the fluffiness that it has, if that's a word. It's not going to lose any of that. It's not going to go flat. It's going to hold its shape, and it's going to always sort of look like a real fluffy plush cushion. So that is the key. So I'm going to now that I'm happy with the amount of foam I have, I'm going to hand stitch this opening where we put in our foam, and then I'm going to start doing the stab stitching around these edges. I'll probably do that off camera. I'll come back right at the end when I'm getting ready to sort of finish a section. I'll come back, I'll show you a little detail of that. Then we'll do the button tufting, and it's a done cushion. So I'm going to turn the camera off now, do some stitching, come back, and you'll join me after that's done. All right? So in this next step, where I'm going to be hand stitching all along, there's an inside seam here. I'm going to follow this seam. I'm going to be stab stitching to the outside. And I found this, this is an really old cotton thread that I had in my stash. It's called Silk Santine. I'm going to show you up close. It's very, very thick, very homespun-y kind of silk. It's not silk, it's cotton, but it's called sand silk. So it's a very thick yarn. It says it's used for crochet. It's a crochet cotton. You can see it's got 75 yards on it. White. It's a very old, cute little old label. Probably came in one of, some old sewing supplies that I had. Anyway, I'm going to use this because I think, that's come off. You want this to look handmade. It will look handmade. And I think this, you're not going to see a ton of this stitching. You're going to see it stabbing, little coming out here and there all the way along, sort of dimpling this whole edge. And I think that this heavier thread here, maybe you can see it against the blue, this heavier thread is going to look more appropriate for the application that we're doing here for this little stitching. So look for a heavier thread that might be sometimes carpet threads, sometimes jacket button threads. Look around in the thread section and look for a heavier chunky thread that you can use to do this piece. Because I think now I have to look for a needle that has a very large eye to it so I can get this in. But I'm going to go off, like I said, I'm going to do the stitching on this, and then I'll bring you back when I'm towards the end, and I'll show you some details, and I'll show you how it looks from there, and then we'll do the button tufting. All right? Thanks. Okay, we're back. I have done some of the stitching, and I'm going to catch you up on the work that I've done. You can see here how I've done some of the, I would call it dimpling, basically taking tucks back and forth in this in this lip. I did it top and bottom. I'm going to show you, I'm going to finish out this little corner here and show you how I did it. I decided to use this cotton thread. It's a thicker cotton thread than what I normally sew with. It has a really sweet old label here, and they call it a crochet cotton. And it's quite old. It was in my stash. It's a mercerized crochet cotton. So it's thicker. I would recommend using a thicker thread like this. It could be a carpet thread. It might be a buttonhole thread, like a large buttonhole thread or a button thread. Look for something thicker than a normal thread for this process. So I talked about a curved needle. This is a curved needle here. In case you're wondering what a curved needle is, how big it is. It's quite large. It's used for upholstery work, and it's very good if you don't have a lot of strength and you need leverage. Going around curves and things in upholstery, this is quite handy. It doesn't use as much, take as much effort to get this through fabrics, and it also works well in curves because of the curved shape. I decided to just use a larger, I needed to look for a large eye needle, and when I did, I found this needle, which was always my go-to needle before I started using the curved needles more. This is actually a leather needle, and if you were to look at the end, it's quite large. But if you were to look at the end, instead of it just being pointed, it's actually kind of chamfered on 4 sides. So it's called a leather needle, and it is kind of pointed that way. So this has been very good at going through all of these layers and the batting. But this is linen. This is not a tapestry or anything. This is linen, so it's a very tightly woven linen, but this needle really did the trick. So all I did is I started in a corner and went all the way around. I'm taking little tacks called stab stitching. So I'm taking a little tack. There's a seam where this piece of fabric here and our sides met, because remember we rolled this down. There's a seam in here, so I am just doing my tack on that seam, and I'm actually taking my needle at a diagonal through, because I don't want to go in the same place. I don't want my thread coming out, on the opposite side here. I actually want it offsetting a little bit. So my next stab stitch, my next little tack is going to be offset just a little bit. So when I go in, I'm actually taking my needle at a diagonal. And that's how I'm moving across. And then I'm probably taking about an 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, and I go diagonal again, and I'm going to make sure that I'm coming up into that seam on this side. For this front edge, I just had to eyeball it. I wanted to sort of maintain a 2-inch spacing here because that's what our foam is. So I really wanted to maintain about a 2-inch spacing. If you want to measure it, I would suggest using like an invisible marking pen to mark a line, to strike a line on this fabric so that you can keep it even. I think one of the characteristics of these French mattresses is that it should look homemade. It shouldn't look mass-produced. They were made by hand, and that's the whole charm of, seeing some of the irregularities in it. So I'm going to keep moving to the corner as I talk. So I had pins in here. I used big T-pins to kind of pinch it together, and as I move across, I was taking out my T-pins because they get in the way at a point. And I just sort of gently pull it. I'm not pulling it really, really tight, but I'm pulling it just enough, and it's going to create that dimpling effect. So you can see I'm just kind of going at an angle every time I go in and out instead of going back and forth. That way I'm just taking it at an angle. And as with most things that we do by hand, consistency is key. So, you know, I try and take a similar bite out of my thread, and I'm trying to also keep the intervals consistent. But I'm not going crazy about it because, like I said, I think the charm in these is to see that it is made by hand and that it isn't regular. There is some variation. And now I'm back to where I started. And I'm just going to knot it. And there you go. So the next step is we are literally ready to button this up. So if you watched the previous episode in this series, it was about making buttons. And we made these little yarn nubs and we made fabric cover buttons. So I made some blue ones and I made some cream ones, and you'll see that I decided to go with all cream on this because I wanted these to pop. When I tried the blue in the places I was putting the buttons all on blue, I was putting them on the blue stripes, I was putting them on the blue fabric, it really just kind of disappeared. They really disappeared. And I want, on this French mattress, I think, you know, the other charm of this is the dressmaker details in it. So having that little bit of contrast is something that I was going for. So here you can see if I put it on blue on here, it really just disappears. As opposed to cream, now that pops. So I figured out my spacing according to the pattern, obviously. And the stripe is great for sort of figuring that out. I used a soft tape measure. This has a crown to it, so you want to go from edge to edge and figure that out. You want to go edge to edge and do your marking. I put straight pins in where I needed to put my button, and I did the same thing on the back. So these are the little yarn tops that we have. I did the exact same marking on this side, and you'll see I still have a pin over there where I need to put my last one. So let me show you how I insert the buttons. So to do this, the best thing to do is to have a really big needle, and the one I have, it's overkill for this project, but it's right here. I don't know if you can even get it on. This needle is, let me tell you how many inches. This is 24 inches. It has a really large eye over here, and it has an extremely sharp point at this end. This is a 24-inch needle, and I have this needle because sometimes I do bolster pillows, and I need to get a button from one end of the bolster to the other. So I went with this. This is certainly much larger than what you need for a cushion like this, but in my workroom, I like to have the least amount of tools as I need to get the job done. So this 24-inch needle, it gets used for everything from these little cushions up to the biggest bolsters that I've ever fabricated. So it has a big, it's very big, and it really might be overkill. So I take these little yarn nubs first, and I want to insert the needle kind of right through the center, like I'm doing a shish kebab skewer. And what I want to do, I've got this really thin white cord. This is actually a very thin shade cord that I would use for Roman shades. It's a nylon cord. It's extremely durable. You cannot break this cord at all. Very, very, very tough. you only can cut it. So I like to use this cord because it's thin for my button tufting, because it holds a knot pretty well and it's very strong, and you'll see there's significant tension on this cord once we do the button tufting. But what I want to do, and this has like yarn on it, I could have probably used these yarn ends to do my tufting, but I was not confident that this yarn would hold up to the strength that I need it to. So these end up becoming just kind of surplus, and we'll cut these off at the end. But what I need to do is thread this cord through the center of my little yarn nub. So I just simply inserted the needle and drew the yarn, or drew the cord through the yarn nub. Okay, so once I have it through, and that cord is through the part where we wrapped around this yarn nub and tied it off. So that's really secure. So the next thing, I'll try and show you this way. Let's see, that way. So I'm going to take my needle, big long needle, and I'm going to go right in where this pin is from the back side. If I had another button with a shank, I could do it from the front, it wouldn't really matter. But once I go from there, then I'm going to look, and I'm going to pop in. You can see where the needle is coming in. I want to go right in the center. I want to go right in the center of where this one is, and I can remove that pin now, that straight pin. So now the needle, you'll see it goes in from the back and it goes to the front directly in line with where those two pins were. So I push it forward a little bit. This is where my eye is over here. This is my yarn nub. I'm going to take the two white ends of the cord and I thread it through the eye. Like that. And now I'm going to draw the needle all the way through. So now I have got the two loose ends of the cord on this side. I have my yarn nub is secure on this side here. We'll cut this off at the end. So here's my front. I'll try and hold this up maybe. So this is the way I do the buttons. I take both of my cords, I put them through the shank. This is why you need a button that has a shank on it, so that, see, it's on my cord now, right? And this shank is going to actually sit kind of in the hole. This is a pretty big hole that was made. This is linen fabric, right? And is a really big needle. So it left a hole in the fabric. And I'm going to make sure that when I tighten and I pull on this cord, I want to make sure that the shank actually kind of sits into that hole. So I'm going to do it flat because I don't think I can do it upright. So I separate out the cords. Make sure it's seated in that hole. And I push down on my thumb while I'm pulling the cords. And I'm going to pull this until it looks even with other things, other buttons around it. The first one is always difficult because you don't know if you're pulling too much or not enough. So what I did with all of these buttons is I actually tied them off, but I didn't totally knot them yet in case I wanted to adjust something. Then you can go back, if you have to, you can go back and adjust something if you just tie a loose knot. It's got to be tight enough to keep it all cinched, but loose enough that you could undo it if you had to. So I do one knot that way. Then I bring my cords to the front of this button. And if I'm satisfied where it's at, this was the last one, so all I needed to do is make sure it's even with the rest. And I'm going to knot it again. One more time here. I just do a double knot. And I make sure that when you're knotting, that your knots are going right up against the shank in the button. You kind of have to feel for it. But if you don't, then your button's going to loosen up and you're going to lose the amount that you've cinched down. And then last step, we just nip these ends. Be careful not to cut your fabric or the button, damage the button when you're doing that. And that is the last step on our cushion. So here you can see how it's tufted. You can see the sides. You can see the quilting effect. It's not real dramatic, but I think you can tell that the profile has been raised a bit in the stripe. Here's what the ends look like. And then there's the other side. Back around to the other end. And this is what I'm calling the bottom, because you know, I didn't want a button here. I just wanted this softness so that it wouldn't scratch the fabric up. I still need to trim this. So on this yarn, I'm not cutting the loops. I'm leaving the loops the way they are, and I'm just cutting the yarn fairly close in because I just don't want them to be seen. And that just fills in that the divot, the tufting area. So this cushion, if you remember, this cushion started out as 2-inch foam. It was 14 by 28. That was the size of the foam. That was the size of the base of our bench. I would say this now, I've measured it. Overall, this is a 4-inch depth on the cushion. So it started as a 2-inch foam insert, but it overall finishes as a 4-inch deep cushion. So keep that in mind. If you don't need or want 4-inch cushion, then you may only use a 1-inch foam inside so that you can reduce, you know, that would probably get you down to a 3-inch overall thickness. I do think that these cushions generally look better thicker, so I don't know if I would go any smaller, but it depends on the proportions. If the overall proportions of the cushion are smaller, you could probably certainly get by, and I might try and experiment with a 1-inch foam insert. But remember then, when you go down to 1 inch, this is also might look kind of odd, you know, narrower. You'd probably certainly need to adjust how much roll you have here. That also might look a little funny because you want to keep the proportions similar. So, and overall, the length, the width, I would say the width and the depth of our cushion, all of this padding probably added an inch on each direction. So it went from a 14 by 28 to a 15. It finishes out at a 15. That's pretty much, I mean, this is all puffy here, but it pretty much finishes out at a 15 by 29. So keep that in mind too. If you're setting this into a space that has 3 sides, then you're going to want to keep that in mind, that it's going to finish out a little bit bigger than your foam insert. So you might want to make an adjustment with that. But for our purposes, because this cushion just sits on basically what was a piano bench, it's free hanging or free sitting. And I tried it out, and it actually sits pretty well, because this little lip here also, you know, sort of helps it stay in place. And it goes over the edge. There's kind of a bullnose edge on the seat base. So I'll take a photo of that at the end. You'll see how that goes. If you haven't seen that first video, go check that out. Chalk painting and how we made our bench. The second video was doing our buttons, both the custom buttons and the yarn buttons and the buttonholes. And if you like these videos and want to see more, we welcome subscribers. If you want a notification on our next video, please click the notification button, which looks like a bell icon. That'll notify you when a new video is published. We're going to publish kind of randomly, but I've got a few videos that are going to be queued up. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I would love to see if you make this according to these instructions, and you know, it doesn't matter, you might need to alter the formula. I would love to see your finished projects. I'd love to see what people are doing with this method, with these instructions. I think creativity, there's a big creative community out there, and I love seeing what other people are inspired to do. So please like, comment, share, and thanks for watching.